welcome to this episode of A Language I Love Is, the podcast that's all about languages, linguistics, and love. I'm Danny, and this episode is a linguistic journey to a country that's new for the show, Indonesia. Among the country's 17,500 islands, you can easily find on a map Halmahera, the largest of the Maluku Islands. Just go slightly to the west, off the coast of Halmahera, and you'll spot the much smaller island of Ternate. Don't let its size fool you though. Ternate was once the centre of a large and powerful kingdom, and was also a place that European navigators and traders desperately wanted to get to, all for the sake of its spices. The history of this region and the Ternate language are the topic of this episode of A Language I Love Is, as introduced by my guest, the scholar Maria Zielenbach. But before we get to Maria and Ternate, I'd just like to thank the show's supporters on Patreon for their continued support. You can become one yourself by heading on over to Patreon and subscribing for some bonus content from my conversations. Also, don't forget to subscribe and leave a hopefully good rating on your preferred podcast platform. We're almost at 100 ratings on Spotify, which I really appreciate. Now, here's Maria talking Ternate. My guest today, joining me from the Netherlands, is Maria Zielenbach. At present, she is a PhD student at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, and she has a great expertise in a great many languages, but as always, she's decided to come along today and talk to me about one language in particular, and I am pleased to say that I know basically nothing about this language, so I'm going to be learning everything today as well. Maria, thank you so much for talking to me today. How are you doing?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm doing great, and you?
I'm also doing very well. This is a kind of nice linguistic treat at the end of the working day for me that I get to talk to an expert linguist about some new language. Well, let's start, as I always like to start, with the main question. Let's kick off. Maria, what is a language that you love?
A language I love is Ternate, the language of the island called Ternate in eastern Indonesia.
Okay, so we are in Indonesia. Indonesia, geographically as a country, is pretty complex. Loads and loads of islands, specifically. How big is this place, Ternate, where we find this language?
Oh, if I have to compare it to something, it's not big. You can circle it in 1 hour with a car.
Is it particularly well populated or perhaps well visited? Does it have tourism that people might know it through?
No. No. Well, not today anymore, but if you go like 500 years back, then Ternate was the place to be in the world. Everyone who had a boat wanted to go there, because Ternate and the neighboring islands in the Moluccas are the endemic home of the clove, the spice that you nowadays put into oranges at Christmas, and it smells very nice. Yeah, so Ternate and also the big island next door, Halmahera, and some other islands in the area, they were the only place where cloves were cultivated for several hundreds or thousand years. And everyone who had a boat went there to buy these cloves or to get possession of the islands and then get the cloves for free.
Okay, understood. So yes, I mean, at one point in time, these are probably connected by huge trade routes, and then Europeans are coming directly and landing on this island to get the cloves themselves. Does it have much of a connection to like European powers, colonial powers, for example?
Yeah, it was under the power of first... The first were the Portuguese, I believe, yeah. The Portuguese, then the Spanish, then the Dutch, and even the Spanish and the Dutch at the same time for a while. Yeah, and then the Dutch until the Indonesian independence in 1945 or 49, depending on how you count.
So yeah, one of those countries that gained their independence from the Netherlands in the 20th century. And I suppose to understand this language, my first question is that so many languages have an associated people, a group who define themselves by their use of this language. So is there a Ternate people?
There are the people living on Ternate. It's very easy to remember.
Very easy. Okay. And a fairly homogeneous people, or are they very divided? Are there dialects of this language, for example?
There are dialects, definitely. But because the island is not that big, they're not huge dialectal variations. And Ternate is also spoken on nearby islands like Halmahera, I already mentioned that, and also some other islands in the area. And Ternate used to be the lingua franca of the Moluccas and beyond until about 100 years ago.
See, that is interesting. Tell us a little bit more about that status as a lingua franca. What did it actually mean in the context of what is today Indonesia?
So Indonesia wasn't a unified state until 1945 or even later, but there were several places of power and centers of power, and Ternate was one of them. And Ternate was a sultanate, and there is a other powerful sultanate next door, which is called Tidore, which you shouldn't ignore. And these two were the main powers in the region. So the Moluccas, also beyond in the what are now called the Moluccas, and the Halmahera region is nowadays called the North Moluccas. They had control over Ambon for a while. Ambon may be an island that some people have heard about. Their power also stretched into Sulawesi, the island to the west. Tidore also was very powerful on New Guinea, in the area of New Guinea that are nowadays part of Indonesia. And Ternate and Tidore are very similar languages, and they're both kind of used, but especially Ternate, as a language of wider communication in this area. So wherever the Sultanate of Ternate was acknowledged as the overlord, people would also have at least some command of Ternate. So on Halmahera, Ternate was until 1910 or even 1920, a little later, was the de facto official language. So if you wanted to go to court, you had to speak Ternate at least a little bit. And nowadays the lingua franca is Malay, but according to what people wrote at the end of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century, people didn't really speak Malay on Halmahera and only in specific places. And so Ternate really had the status that nowadays Malay has. It also means that a number of loanwords spread from Ternate into neighboring languages, or Tidore words spread all the way into New Guinea. And there's even one word that spread all the way to us. It's the word couscous, not the food, the cute animal. If you don't know what a couscous looks like, you should Google it. It's a really, really cute animal with very large eyes. So if you look the word up on in the Oxford English Dictionary, it will tell you that it's from Malay, couscous, and then from an unknown local language. And this unknown local language very likely was Ternate, because it was the language that people usually encountered first when they got there.
Excellent. I wish I'd known that in advance, because then that could be my final fun fact. But no, that's fine. That is a great fun fact. I love that. A connection all the way between there and English. And you mentioned there that it's been a lingua franca. To become a lingua franca, the, shall we say, social conditions need to be right. And we have this sultanate that's, I assume, very powerful, very prestigious, and is able to transmit this language around this region. Just to be clear, when was that? When would you say that the Ternate language was especially prestigious?
It's probably from maybe the 14th century to the beginning of the 20th century. We don't really know when Ternate started. We don't really know when the people were converted to Islam. We don't really know when the first king ruled over Ternate, when the island was settled. It may have been in the 13th century. It may have been earlier. We don't really know. But the 15th and 16th century is when the traders come in, the foreign traders. First from Java, then a little bit later probably from China and Arabia, and then in the 16th century also the Europeans. And with the spice trades, the sultanates become a lot more powerful, and they manage to expand their territory. This is, by the way, not like European territories. It's not, you don't have to imagine this like a European colonial state. It's not like the Ternate people sent troops somewhere to hold the country, hold their territory. They did it originally, and then they kind of put officials there, and then the places they conquered accepted the Sultan as the official ruler, but usually after a while this boiled down to just like a formal acceptance. Sometimes they paid tribute, sometimes they didn't, but it was more dependent on trade relations than on actual military power. That was only the case sometimes.
You say there then that the Ternate people have for centuries now been Muslim. Islam has come with literacy very often, being a religion which has a very important book at the centre of it. That may mean that for centuries there has been writing in this area, and perhaps even before the arrival of Islam. Do we have a long historical record of writing for the Ternate language?
There are records of writing that go back very, very far. So the oldest preserved manuscript in Ternate is a contract from 1638. It's a contract between the Dutch and the Sultan of Ternate. And it's bilingual, it's in Dutch and Ternate. And this is the first extant text in a Papuan language. So Ternate is not an Austronesian language. It's what we call Papuan language. That's not a genetic classification. It's just a geographical umbrella term for all the languages in the area that are not Austronesian languages. And there are even some few words that we know from even before from European writings. And then we have this one manuscript from the 17th century and then several known manuscripts from the 18th and 19th century. And they're all written in Arabic characters in what we call Jawi, so the Indonesian or Malay, or whatever you would like to call it, version of Arabic script.
Does the Arabic script suit this language particularly well, or is it a little bit of an awkward fit?
It's quite okay, as long as you use vowel signs, which they do. The phonology is not that complex, so it's not like there are any weird sounds that you can't really represent. The version of Arabic script that Jawi is built on is Persian. I'm not an expert in the history of Jawi, but that's what I know. So, for example, you have the Persian form of the letter Kaf. From Persian, they already got letters for G and P and other sounds that Arabic doesn't have. So it works quite well.
That's interesting, yeah. So thanks to it being transmitted through the Persian sphere, the Persian language, then it was perhaps a little bit better prepared to write down Ternate. Now, you mentioned the language family. This is a really interesting topic, which I do want to get your view on. It's not an Austronesian language. Austronesian, for context, is huge language family, lots of languages in the area. I believe Malay is a member of that large language family, but Ternate doesn't belong to it. Firstly, why do we think that? And secondly, what language family does it belong to?
Yeah, how would you know? We know because we do historical linguistics, and the vocabulary and the morphemes and everything else of Ternate and the related languages are so different from Austronesian languages that they can't be said to belong to Austronesian. So there are lots of Indonesian loanwords, but there are no regular sound correspondences or anything. And also the morphology, as I said, is quite different. And Ternate instead belongs to a language family called North Halmahera, which is very creative because it's about languages spoken on Halmahera in the north of Halmahera and neighboring islands. And then there's also a family called South Halmaheran, which is spoken in the south of Halmahera, and these are Austronesian languages. If you look up North Halmahera, you may find that it allegedly belongs to a language family called West Papuan Phylum. And that's probably not true. At least it may be true on a historical level, but it's not demonstrable with the usual methods in historical linguistics. This proposed language family is based on a number of alleged cognates, so forms that look a little bit alike, and some morphemes that are similar, but yeah, there are person indices, so it's like ne and ma and pa and forms you find all over the world. So there's not strong evidence. And actually the project I work for, so the goal of this project is to demonstrate whether or not the West Papuan phylum hypothesis may be true, but I don't see much evidence.
So the final conclusion of this project may be a no.
Yeah, at least it's not demonstratable. Because if the languages were demonstratably related to languages on West New Guinea, so the island New Guinea is called Papua by linguists for some historical reasons. So West Papuan languages are spoken on West Papua. And if the North Halmahera languages were demonstrably related to them, then it would mean that probably the North Halmaherans came from Papua or the other way around. So that would be cool, but yeah, we don't know.
And this language family, it may not have a complex history or don't imagine a complex family tree, but nonetheless, there's quite a few languages included within this family, the North Halmahera family. And is Ternate the most populous, the most commonly spoken of that family?
It's very difficult to get exact speaker numbers, but probably not. There are probably Galela and Tobela have more speakers, but it's very difficult to say. Yeah, but yeah, there are about 10 languages, probably more. It depends on how you count languages.
Of course, yeah. This is always a problem which the show will continue to run into or perhaps revel in. I don't know. I mean, this is difficult, the whole classification of languages. But nonetheless, there's a diversity within this family, even if its prehistory is not at present, particularly complex, at least in the view of linguists. Could you tell me a little bit about its phonology, the sounds of this language? Is it particularly unusual in its phonology? Does its phonology share many things in common with local languages?
Yes, in the sense that it has a very small sound inventory, like Austronesian languages also often do. So it's really not spectacular. It has 5 vowels and then I believe 18 consonants, but nothing weird, nothing exotic.
So if you like simple phonologies, if you're learning a language, then maybe Ternate is for you. What about the lexicon of this language? You've said that this is a language that, through its status in the past, has given words to other languages of the area. Has it received many? I mean, for example, modern European languages in the area, or even Arabic?
Yeah, there are quite a few loanwords. So there are several layers of loanwords, if you may. So there's one layer you may call it Old Austronesian, so very old Austronesian loans that are definitely of Austronesian origin, but we can't say from which language specifically they came. For example, there's Gazi, which means sold, and that's probably from Proto-Austronesian reconstruction pronunciation. It starts with a Q, and then it's Q-Sira, so Q-A-S-I, capital R. Nice reconstruction. Or there's Gate, which means liver, which is from a reconstructed Proto-Malay Polynesian form. And for example, there's also the word for house, which is Fala in Ternate, and then reconstructed as Pola for Proto-North Halmahera, and that's probably from Proto-Malay Polynesian Balay. And then there are also interesting words where you don't know which direction they're traveling. For example, Proto-North Halmahera, the word for water is Archair, with an R in the end. But then Proto-Sangeric, it's an Austronesian language family to the north, and there the word for water is Arche, without a final R. So we don't really know in which direction this word traveled, but it seems to be related. And then later we have Javanese loanwords, because lots of Javanese traders came there and probably also settled there. For example, we have Kedaton, which is the palace, or Salaka, which is silver, or Machang, tiger. And by the way of Sanskrit and also Malay, also Sanskrit words made their way there. So, for example, Astana, the word for throne, is a very common Sanskrit loanword in Malay, Javanese, and then also Ternate. Or one that I particularly like is Bidadari, which is a kind of mystical creature. It's sometimes translated as nymph. And it's from a Sanskrit mythical being, which also probably came there via Javanese. And then we have Arabic via the Islamic influence. We have Spanish, Portuguese loanwords, for example, horas. Horas means hour in all North Halmahera languages. And then, of course, we have lots and lots of Dutch words. So basically all modern concepts, you could say, at least at the beginning of the 20th century, came from Dutch. For example, we have aardappel, which is potato, aardappel in Dutch. And then we have, for example, of course, the word for bicycle, fiets, from Dutch fiets. And also one I really like is kalaki, which means accusation, and which is from Dutch klachten. So apparently accusations are something that people connected to the Dutch.
So, the first of my 3 questions, which is our chance to get to know you, Maria, a little bit better, which is basically, how did you come to know this language, Ternate? What's the story, what's the journey that you've been on?
Yeah, so really, I didn't choose the language chose me in a way. I became interested in linguistics when I was about 13, because I was and still am a huge fan of Jiah or Tolkien. And as we all know, Tolkien was a historical linguist. So I read the word etymology for the first time, and then I started to look up etymologies and discovered it's the best thing that exists on this planet. So I wanted to be a linguist. And then I also was very fond of Arabic, and still am. So I also wanted to learn Arabic. So after I did the German version of A-levels, I decided to study linguistics and something called Languages and Cultures of the Islamic World in Cologne. And I took Arabic classes, but I wasn't really satisfied with the way the cultural classes, you could say, so the classes on Arabic culture were taught in Cologne. But we also had to take a class on Indonesia. And this I really liked, because the professor kind of introduced, or he talked about topics, cultural topics, social topics, by the way of using Indonesian literature, and that's an approach I really like. And I thought, okay, let's not do Arabic anymore, do Indonesian. And then I took Indonesian classes and more classes on Indonesia and neighboring countries. So I had a focus on Indonesia in my bachelor's. And then I did my master's in linguistics, and mostly I was mostly interested in historical linguistics, but I don't like Indo-European languages at all. So I tried to get out of the Indo-European courses as much as I could, but without getting too deep into the languages. But I completed my master's being a historical linguist, maybe focusing on Semitic languages, but never having studied Semitistics at the university. So I was looking for a PhD position, and then a job offer came up, which was about North Sahara languages. And it looked for a historical linguist who had some experience in Indonesia, probably knew Arabic, and the general familiarity with the languages in the area. So I was like, oh, that's me. So I applied for the job, I got the job, and that's where I am now. Before I got the job, I had heard about the North Moluccas in passing, as most people have who study Indonesia, but I knew nothing about the languages there.
And what's it like to work with this language as a scholar? I mean, is there a large existing body of research for the language? And also, you need data, so you need examples. Is there accessible data for Ternate?
Yeah, there is, and also for the other North Sahara languages. So because the area was so long under European interest, there's quite a lot of documentation beginning in the 19th century, and for Ternate even earlier. And then we have missionaries at the beginning of the 20th century who did quite a lot of work, and then later other missionaries and linguists went there and collected lots of data. So for a Papuan language, it's pretty well described. For Indo-European language, it's not described at all, but of course, you have to be happy with what you have, and I'm pretty happy.
Yeah, I can imagine. And your day-to-day research job involves, I guess, primarily, you need vocabulary. What is it that you need from the language to progress with your project?
I mostly do vocabulary, of course, because I'm a traditional historical linguist, so I do cognates and sound laws and all this stuff. And they are very huge dictionaries, so for Ternate, there are several dictionaries which have around 1,000 items. Of course, they overlapped sometimes, but still it's quite impressive. And then for other languages, there are really huge dictionaries. For example, for Galela and Tobelo, 2 different missionaries wrote huge dictionaries which have almost 7,000 entries, which for a Papuan language is wonderful. It's a lot. It's really great.
And how well developed is the field of historical linguistics for North Halmahera languages? Is there room to make real great strides and big contributions to the field? Can we look forward to a Zielenbach's law someday, for example?
There is one, yeah. So there have been people thinking about North Halmahera before, and the languages are very similar. So it's not that difficult to find sound correspondences. Speakers also often find them themselves. And then the missionaries discovered some sound laws, and several linguists also thought about that and established sound correspondences. I found some minor sound laws. For example, there's a proto-sound that I reconstruct is capital T, and this apparently vanishes in context of E, or I should say, in English, in most contexts. And this is a law that I discovered. I haven't found it I haven't seen it anywhere else. So that's Zielenbach's law if you want. Yeah, and then also some minor sound changes that people had discovered somewhere but didn't really know whether they were regular or not. So that's the phonological reconstruction. And then the morphological reconstruction basically wasn't done at all. Before, there was some reconstruction of personal indices, but nothing more. So that's what I spent most time on.
I should have phrased my question differently. So there already is at least the first Zielenbach's law.
It's not published yet.
Well, then you can't be surprised if it's not appearing in literature somewhere. Like, its day will come.
Yeah, I'm not sure I will name a sound change after me. I think the time is done that we do that.
Yeah, I suppose. And even in the past, I mean, was it somebody named it after somebody else? You couldn't do it after yourself, I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you have particularly obliging PhD students someday, they may gather your notes and maybe then there'll be a Zielenbach's law.
And maybe I would prefer to have like a morphological thing called after me, like the Naten present in the European.
So far, you have amply demonstrated your expertise and your long-held enthusiasm for the Ternate language. What is one thing, amidst all that enthusiasm, that you particularly love?
That would be the onset mutation that you find in Ternate and also the other Northern Hero languages, with the exception of West Makian. I think onset mutation has been mentioned on the podcast in the episodes about Celtic languages, and that's where onset mutation is known from. But there are many other languages in the world that also have onset mutation. The North American languages are one of them, and they are probably unique. At least I haven't seen any contrary in the literature so far. They're the only languages that use onset mutation to derive different word classes or parts of speech. So, for example, I have to apologize for my poor pronunciation of Ternate. I can't roll R's, but I do my best. So it would be poreki, which means old, that has a P, a voiceless bilabial plosive in the beginning. And then you have boreki, which means elder. So poreki would be the adjective. Adjectives are used like verbs in Ternate. And then you have boreki, which is the noun. And then, for example, you have togu, stop, and dogu, end. Same with T and D. Kinyao, weak, and ginyao, young. So young is not the noun, but there are two different meanings depending on what initial consonant you have. And then you also have addition of a consonant to a root that is vowel initially. So, for example, abo means cut off, and then you have nyabo, wound. Or you have ise, hear, and gise, listen to. So again, a subtle change in semantics. So yeah, that's onset mutation. So on the one hand, it seems to derive nouns from verbs, or used to derive nouns from verbs, because it's not productive anymore, as far as I can tell. Or it also causes semantic shifts, or it also occurs after specific prefixes, verbal prefixes. But I can't really explain yet when it happens and why it happens. But I came up with a theory of how this developed in the languages, and I believe it has something to do with a nasal prefix that was assimilated to the initial consonant, and then because the nasal is voiced, the voiceless initial plosive was voiced as well. I really love that, like this little detail in the languages that sometimes gets in your way when you do reconstruction, because you have to figure out, is this like the real proto root that we have here, or is it the mutated form? And then sometimes you find residues of roots that are only mutated in some forms. That's really cool.
This is really cool. This gets me very excited, this sort of thing as well. I love it. I love it. So you drew the comparison there to the Celtic languages of Europe. So we've had Welsh on the podcast, we've had Old Irish on the podcast, thanks to me. And again, these are languages where the beginnings of words, the initial consonants are changing to tell you something. So the sounds seem to be changing in strikingly similar ways between Ternate and modern-day Celtic languages, but the function is a bit different. And once again, it's because in the past, there's something extra that is causing the change that has since disappeared. And it sounds to me that it's just one thing, some sort of prefix with a nasal consonant that's responsible for everything. Is that right?
Yeah, I reconstructed a system that needs only one prefix. It may be that there are different causes, but I found this one way to explain it. And of course, it's reconstruction. There are no historical data where you can see how this developed. So reconstruction is all we got. And I presented my reconstruction to several people, and they were all quite happy about it. Yeah, so there seems to be some kind of nasal prefix that has a national nasal, and then almost total assimilation to the following plosive, except for the voice, which was changed for the plosive. And then, for example, you have these verbs that have these words that are vowel initial. For example, adi, and then means exchange, and then nadi means change clothes. And you have a subtle semantic change, and you have a nasal that's added to the vowel initial word. So that's where I got the idea of the nasal prefix from.
Very nice. And to be clear, I mean, this is a pretty solid reconstruction, but we don't have direct evidence. It's not like the other members of the family preserve this little prefix.
No. There are other nasal initial prefixes that may be related to this prefix that was assimilated. So there are, for example, old classifiers that only occur in the numeral system now, in some languages and in some other areas of the language, but they also have the sound, the velar nasal in the beginning. So this prefix may have been a classifier, some kind of classifier.
Well, I love that last section very much. I am a sucker for anything that takes us back in time to show how languages used to be, and we're all using linguistic evidence to get there. Brilliant. I love it. Third and final question from me. Maria, what is one thing, could be anything, about the Ternate language that you would like the audience listening to know?
Maybe in the first place that this language exists at all, because many people, or I like to say that Ternate is one of these places in the world that nobody knows, but everybody knows. Because everybody at one point in their life has heard about the Spice Islands. And the Moluccas are part of the Spice Islands. People kind of know that they exist and that they were a very central factor in history and also European colonial history. But they don't know anything beyond that about the actual places and the people that lived there. Yeah, Ternate was the lingua franca of one of the most important centers of the spice trade. And following from this, the long attestation of Ternate from the almost 15th century. Yeah, the first documentation is from the 15th century that we know. Usually people think Papuan languages are like they're not written down. People don't have writing systems. Then at one point some missionary came by or some linguist and brought him down for the first time. But that's not true for all Papuan languages. For example, Ternate had an indigenous writing culture, and Tidore had as well. So these languages exist, and just because they're called Papuan doesn't mean that they are not attested in the past. Very nice.
Two great points to end on. Well, if people would like to take their newfound interest in the Ternate language further, where would you recommend that they go start?
You could start on YouTube by just typing in Ternate. Or maybe you can look for one of the nice religious songs in Ternate, which are called qasida. So it's the Islamic way of speech singing, you could say. And if you look for Ternate and qasida, either with Q or K in the beginning, then we'll find lots of very nice songs in Ternate with subtitles, sometimes Indonesian subtitles. For the other languages as well, there's great music on YouTube in all the North Sahara languages. Not all of them religious, but many of them are. Then you could also visit my blog. Unfortunately, I'm not posting there anymore because I found that I have no time to write blog posts. But it's called halmahera-hypothesis.org. I posted some blog posts there about North Halmahera languages, very general things. And then, of course, I used to be very active on Twitter, and I'm not anymore. Now I'm Blue Sky, I'm not that active anymore. But yeah, I sometimes do post there about North Halmahera languages.
Okay, well, Maria Zielenbach, everyone. That was wonderful. So much information about what is, at least for me, a very new corner of the world. So thank you so much.
No problem.
Time to end now with a final fun fact from me, and I figure it seems most appropriate to shine a spotlight on the various etymological contributions that languages of Indonesia have made to English. One such language of that corner of the world is Malay, an international language with speakers numbering in the hundreds of millions. Just to be clear, the standardized form of Malay that's used in Indonesia is called Indonesian. Malay is a member of the Austronesian language family, as is Javanese, spoken on the island of Java and elsewhere. These two are languages that are spread across a large area and have an abundance of speakers, so it's no surprise then that some of their words were adopted into the languages of the European explorers, traders and colonists that came to what would one day become Indonesia. The orangutan, literally the man of the forest, is one such borrowing from Malay, as is amok, or amok, used in the phrase to run amok. This goes back to a Malay or Javanese word for violence or furious attack, and it reached English via Portuguese and Italian. That's everything for this episode of A Language I Love Is. My thanks go to my guest today, Maria, for talking to me about Ternate, and also to the podcast's first few supporters on Patreon. My thanks also go to you, dear listener, for listening. Until the next time, keep well and keep loving language.